Hello, and welcome to Speaking Frankly, where we feature honest talk with thought leaders across the advertising ecosystem and beyond. I am Kim Frank, your host and Geopath president. Today, I am super excited to be joined by Bob Liodice. He is the CEO of the Association of National Advertisers, and he is a Geopath board member. Bob, thank you so much for joining me today.
So happy to be with you, Kim. Welcome to the holiday season. I hope everybody's in good spirits and good cheer.
Yeah, keeping our smiles on our faces, Bob. And I see you're in your office in New
I
York.
am. I
So the
am.
ANA is
Every
back at
now
the
and then
office.
we've got to reacquaint ourselves with where we came from.
Wonderful. So I stalked your bio a little bit before we got on the podcast today, and I can see that you are in your 25th year at the ANA. Is that the case?
Yeah, it,
Congratulations.
it is true. At 1995, I started when we were archaic and analog, and it's been a phenomenal ride through the journey. It's hard to believe it's been that long. It's gone by in a flash.
So can you tell us a little bit about what has changed with the ANA in the time that you've been there?
Yeah, it's. I'll try to keep it short and snappy, but the reality is that we learned that we needed to ensure that the voice of the marketer was heard, and that the agenda of the marketer was in fact prosecuted. We had lost sight of that for many, many years, and we had to recognize that in many respects, it's the marketer's agenda. It's their money, it's their brands, and we needed to better represent them and ensure that as the industry evolved, particularly technologically, that their interests were recognized and acknowledged, and that we had to move the industry to ensure that brand and business building were at the forefront of the industry's objectives.
Great. So you just announced, I believe last week, that the marketer's word of the year is pivot. Yeah.
Yes.
Marketer's word of the year is pivot, which is a word I think we've all heard quite a bit.
Yes.
Um, so what are you seeing? How are your brands pivoting?
Well, I think the most significant pivot that brand marketers have made occurred right around the beginning of the COVID crisis, when it was became very much understood that the consumer really needed to be at the center of everything. And when we acknowledged that, we also recognized that the consumer had a lot of challenges. They were very, very worried and anxious about their health, their employment, their financial condition. They were thrown into a universe, a global universe, that essentially had been fractured by the COVID crisis. And many did not know how to navigate. In fact, we all did not know how to navigate. This was a once in a lifetime type of experience. And the pivot that we saw was that many brands basically stopped focusing in on their products and services and started focusing in on humanity and attempting to reach consumers in a way that spoke to their anxieties and attempted to navigate them to a place where they could at least feel comfort that that their needs were being recognized and fulfilled to whatever extent that they could possibly be fulfilled. Many of the brands pivoted and turned their factories into hand sanitizer organizations, or development of masks, or even like AB InBev opened community bars online, so to speak, to ensure that the social well-being of consumers were being recognized and understood. And that 180-degree pivot continued, particularly as we navigated past the social injustice crisis as well, recognizing that there needed to be a far greater and far more compassionate understanding that we are all one community, but that we needed to start to behave differently. Sometimes bad behavior came in very unconscious ways, and we needed to be able to bring that forward with the understanding that we as a community needed particularly to focus in on the accurate portrayal of women and cultures in all of our advertising and in the way that we behave as organizations. So there were quite a few substantial pivots in 2020, and I think that the word of the year was most appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it sounds like um, through that change, there have been a lot of silver linings for marketers. And I wonder, how long is that going to last? Are these long-term changes or are these short-term pivots?
Yeah, it's a great question because there are many, many times in the past that we've seen everybody rally around the flag, and after a while it fritters out. I do think that this focus in on brands for humans is here to stay. I think that there is an acknowledgement that brands are just more than product and service delivery vehicles. That in fact they need to serve a higher purpose, a usefulness for consumers. And as Mark Pritchett always says, we need to be a force for good and a force for growth. And being a force for good does facilitate that force for growth longer term. And in doing so, we need to acknowledge how we need to become purposeful and useful in consumers' lives. That by doing so, it does facilitate humanity for growth, as well as their own business and brand growth. Otherwise, it's just philanthropy. And so there needs to be the duality of consumers win as well as brands and businesses.
Great. So with all of this chaos and change going on, you've been really busy at the ANA. I know you've been working with the World Federation of Advertisers to address cross-platform measurement, which is,
Right.
a serious issue that's been facing marketers since the dawn of time.
Yes.
Do you mind giving us an update on what's going on with the WFA and how the ANA fits into that landscape?
Yeah, it's actually started almost in reverse, where a lot of the focus in on measurement began at the ANA about, a decade ago. And in fact, it was done in collaboration at the time with the IAB and the 4As. And we created essentially a focus in on what we call 3MS, making measurement make sense. And we thought that the ability to develop cross media would have been relatively simplified once we escaped from that phase. But the reality was that technology changed everything and changed the ability to do cross media measurement in total. And so we went through a number of phases where we tried to execute it over the course of time, but it didn't work. And about 2 years ago, ANA's board of directors acknowledged that it was time to focus in on cross-media measurement through the lens of the marketer, trying to bring the entire organization or entire ecosystem together at one point in time proved to be not necessarily the most productive and fruitful path. So once we started to move down that road, we spoke with the WFA about the need for ensuring that global principles were created, because a lot of the media was in fact global. When you think about the global platforms of Facebook and Google and others, we needed to ensure that what we were trying to do here in the United States married up to what was possible to go around the world, because we didn't want Google and Facebook and others to go in a particular direction that was useful for the United States but had no applicability for what would be appropriate in other countries. So we decided to work with the WFA and ISBA in particular, which is the UK equivalent of the ANA, to work to develop those global principles, which we did. It took quite a while, but those were released in September of 2020. And concurrently, what the ANA has been doing is working very, very closely with the broadcasters and the digital media providers, particularly the major platforms, to begin that process of developing trust and transparency among those particular organizations, but B, now starting to take those principles and to create the foundational tactical and technological deployments for how that can in fact move forward. And there has been a lot of behind the scenes progress that is moving literally at warp speed. And our goal is to have a pilot up and running by September of 2021, which will be the timing of ANA's measurement conference. So we are pedal to the metal. We're working very aggressively with the platforms and the broadcasters. And as I said, we are very excited and enthused about bringing that pilot to the forefront next September.
That's fabulous. And for anybody listening, that is an incredible conference. And I hope we'll be able to be there in person for the next ANA measurement conference.
I hope you're there, my friend.
Yes, for sure. So, speaking of tech, there's also a lot of change happening. One being the potential demise of the cookie.
Hmm.
So, really hot topic. What does this
Yeah.
really mean in, practical terms for marketers and media channels?
Yeah, and this is probably one of the most important priorities that we have in our industry. Think about the progress that's been made over the past 5 to 10 years, because we've had the opportunity to essentially market ourselves in a very digitally targeted, focused area. That's going to be turned on its head when essentially the cookie channel, particularly through Chrome, as Google announced, is withdrawn, and as Apple is changing its IDFA priorities in its iOS systems. Those two concurrently are going to turn digital marketing on its head. And we need to overhaul the system. And as such, the ANA, 4A's IAB, and the NAI have collaborated to form an organization called PRAM, which is the Partnership for Responsible and Addressable Media. Addressability is critical. That's essentially what cookies and other platforms provide us the opportunity to be able to do. That has changed the way we conduct business. And that withdrawal is going to affect how we do business, not only here in the United States, but around the world. So we have brought together the heads of state, if you will, to be able to address all of these issues and to do so in a privacy safe way. Privacy has moved to the forefront of consumer focus. Look at GDPR, look at the California privacy initiatives, look at other initiatives around the world. But what we don't necessarily have is a level of commonality that will allow us to be able to pull all of this together without the guidance of an appropriate identifier and the ability to become addressable in that privacy safe universe. So that organization was created earlier this year, and like cross-media measurement, is also working at warp speed in order to be able to do this, because as cookies are withdrawn in early 2022, we don't want to move completely into contextual advertising one more time. We need to have a targeted mechanism that consumers respect and trust. And we understand that consumers are not always trusting the advertisers to act on their behalf. So we have to do this with a sincere effort that also has an undercurrent of self-regulation at its foundation. Self-regulation is not something that had been part of the fabric of digital marketing before, something which had affected both television and radio in years past, but had not necessarily been part of the digital platforms. That is now also going to be introduced as part of the efforts that we need to get to by early 2022.
So another tech change coming is 5G. Is
Yes.
this hype? Is it an upside for marketers? Is it how do you see this impacting your world?
It's a great question, and I will be honest with you, I'm probably not the expert to know how this is going to evolve, but what I do is I take my lessons from history. And history suggests that every time we do have a technological gain, the abilities of marketers continue to gain and to grow. And that's been fabulous, and I think that's what has made our ecosystem as productive as it possibly can be. But with all of the technological changes, including 5G, what we as marketers also need is a foundational level of increased transparency. I'm not saying 5G is going to be non-transparent, but what technology has brought to bear is change at a speed and a level of complexity that is not always in the best interests of marketers because of a lack of transparency. And when marketers don't necessarily have all of the information needed to make optimal business and marketing decisions, those decisions suboptimize their overall performance. And that is not in the best interest of our ecosystem, because if brands and businesses aren't performing at their optimal scale, the resources that they have to fuel the entire ecosystem be they agencies, media companies, publishers, or whatever, are going to also fall short of their desired level. And marketers provide the mother's milk for our entire ecosystem. And we need to have a 360-degree understanding of how we can break through some of those transparency concerns in order to optimize decision making.
Great. So here we are. We're recording on December 18th. We are at the very end of 2020. Would you say your members are feeling optimistic about 2021? Do we see the light at the end of the COVID tunnel?
Yeah, I think that the introduction of vaccines was a game changer for the world. And the reason why is what it starts to do is to relieve the uncertainty that has surrounded all of us. Doesn't matter whether we're in marketing, I mean, just day-to-day living here and around the world. You think about 7 billion people have been affected by this simultaneously. And our ability to exit was uncertain. We didn't know how to exit in a non-vaccinated world. We thought that was taking place in late August, early September, but then it kicked back up with ferocity. And look at where we are now with schools and businesses going through shutdowns. And I mean, it's just been awful that the damage and toll it's taken on consumers and society. But vaccinations offer great hope. It gives us the ability to have the confidence that we are going to return to either some degree of normalcy or complete normalcy. Granted, the world will have changed. Just the way we're doing business right now through this virtual platform is a massive game changer, but it is one that I think is going to improve the productivity of our entire business system and is going to be a long-term game changer as we've all adapted remarkably well to this environment. But the eventual elimination of all of that uncertainty is certainly going to give us the ability to invest with confidence in our future and to be able to restore the brand and business building capabilities that we are all involved in. And I would say, my guess is by the middle of the year, we will have accomplished most, if not all of that.
That's wonderful. So going into 2021, do you have any words of wisdom for the out-of-home industry?
Keep reinventing and keep measuring. I think that what we have seen as part of 2020, to again use the word pivot. Pivot was, I think, a technical term that allowed us to simply adapt to the universe to ensure that we could continue to conduct business. But as that certainty in 2021 starts to unfold, we need to be able to pivot to reimagine what our ecosystem's potential can be. And in that regard, measurement is a foundational cornerstone of that. It is the old saying, you can't manage what you can't measure. And I think that there is a wealth of frustration in our industry about the general lack of measurement capability throughout. I congratulate what Geopath has done in advancing measurement among its members and throughout the ecosystem. And I congratulate the out-of-home industry through its reimagining over the past few years about its interaction with consumers and customers accordingly. That trend just can't stop. That has to continue to ensure that the out-of-home industry maintains its relevancy in the ecosystem going forward. And quite frankly, that is what we need to do in order to be able to advance. We need to rely upon all of the media platforms to bring that forward. But I think that the out-of-home industry should feel very proud of what it's been able to accomplish to enhance its relevancy and to make it a very foundational component in a marketer's arsenal.
Wonderful. So speaking frankly, Bob, if you could put any message out across the out-of-home ecosystem to the world today, what would you put on all of that inventory?
Well, that's a great question. I think part of it is the word exhale. We have been bottled up for, 9 months now. And we have not only survived, but in many ways we've thrived. Not completely, but in certain areas. I think that as the vaccinations take hold, as our ecosystems return to normal, there is going to be a general sense of relief and enthusiasm at the same time, where we can begin to not only exhale, but reestablish the foundations and norms for the reimagination and creativity process to take hold again. I mean, there has been an abundance of creativity that has happened in this past year, but it has been under the essentially the umbrella of how do we survive. I think that what I would put on an out of home placement is how do we thrive. In fact, let's get back to thriving. Let's get out of this status quo, which has handicapped us and put a straitjacket on our industry and our entire society for all practical purposes. And let us get back to thriving as an economy and as a society. And if we do reimagine how we can thrive as an economy and as a society, I think we will all then be able to exhale and enjoy what we've been able to enjoy pre-COVID. I think it's all made us appreciate what we've lost, and I for one, am very, very anxious to gain back what we've lost and to enjoy the good and simple things that we've often taken for granted.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for joining me this morning. Hopefully next time I see you, it will be, somewhere in the same room and we can have actual coffee as opposed to virtual coffee. Thank you everyone for joining, for listening. This has been super fun. If you have any questions, you can always email us at geekout@geopath.org with the subject line, Speaking Frankly Questions. Happy holidays, Bob, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you for everything.
And that's it.
Good
I don't
job.
know if you guys saw my son, my 6-year-old son came in the middle
No,
and
I
he
didn't.
wanted to give me a Lego guy.